الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. The subjects in the Quran are so many, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for anyone that has a sound heart to accommodate, if it's correct to say, all of these subjects. This heart that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created is a miraculous creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the heart to be the place where it receives the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِنَّهُ لَتَنزِيلُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ نَزَلَ بِهِ الرُّوحُ الْأَمِينَ عَلَى قَلْبِكَ لِتَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُنذِرِينَ. This Quran, Tanzil, came down from above from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Ruh al-Amin, Jibreel alayhi salam, brought this Quran to where? عَلَى قَلْبِكَ, unto the heart of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And therefore the heart of the Prophet ﷺ is the purest of all hearts. And we are commanded to follow the example of the Prophet ﷺ. And the only way for these hearts to be purified is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purified the heart of the Prophet ﷺ with this Quran, which is this Quran, nothing else. The Quran, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for the person to leave himself to the book of Allah, that it cures the diseases of the heart, it purifies the heart. But with the proper job that a person should observe to how to make the Quran the means of cure and purification. وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. We bring down in the Quran what is cure and mercy to the believers. So believing in it and believing that the Quran is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, miraculous words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke the Quran. So when a person recites the Quran, this is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exalting it. Al-Iman comes first, of course, before everything else, and all of the things that we mentioned before, which is the foundation of any means of benefit. The Tawheed of Allah, being warned against ash-shirk, to be upon the sunnah, to stay away from the things of innovations in the deen and bid'ah, to have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hearts. We learn that from the Quran. This is one of the means that purify the hearts. The fear of Allah, the hope for the rewards from Allah, this is also something that we get from the Quran. So when a person is reading the Quran, understanding the meanings of the Quran with the intention of how to purify our hearts, how to make oneself among who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praising in the Quran. This can never be attained by a reminder here or there. The reminders are only like a whip to the hearts, to get us to be awakened, so that then we take upon that journey, so that we can learn it one verse after another. And as we mentioned that statement over and over again, which is how to learn the deen of Allah. It's not to be learned all at once. It needs one ayah after another ayah, one hadith after hadith. And each one according to their capacity. Not every person has to be a scholar in the deen, but the mandatory things for us to learn. And we think that the mandatory things are only some physical actions, and what Allah permitted and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, this is definitely part of the deen. But as Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, if the first thing that was revealed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was the halal and the haram, no one would have applied it. And you see that clearly in our life. Imagine someone that is living a life of ignorance and forgetfulness and sins and following his desire. Even he's a Muslim. You come in to say that Muslim immediately, by the way, silk is haram for you to wear because you're a man. Gold is haram for you to wear because you're a man. It's only permissible for women. He'll look at you and he's not listening, he's not hearing. Why would he expect, unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, awakened his heart, of course. But as she said, but first it was revealed the ayat about the Jannah, the hellfire, the ayat about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once the heart is purified, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were ready to do anything. It doesn't matter, as we heard before, they're coming to even to give the pledge to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam with whatever is in there, according to what's in the heart even of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And they were much joyful and happy, and the happiness in them to receive the wahi more than anything else. And the wahi comes down with do this, do not do that. The hearts have been purified. And that's why to get this over with, it's an important job that we need to do. Why? Because the real joy of this life is when the hearts are purified by the Quran, and then that person is in that full submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's therefore the deeds done by the heart. Most of the Quran is addressing, actually the entire Quran, al-khitab, or addressing the hearts. And then the physical actions becomes the easiest thing ever once the heart is in that state of the love of Allah, the fear of Allah, the hope for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being pleased with Allah, having tranquility in the heart, having the al-khashya, to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with knowledge, having the yaqeen, the certainty. All of these things are in the heart. Ikhlas, sincerity, truthfulness. And these are the foundation for any action. Someone has these things in his heart, tell him to stand all night in prayer, tell him to be away from the haram, riba, to be away from severing the relationship between yourself and your family, and all of these things that the nafs takes over becomes the easiest thing whatsoever. And we have the examples in the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions radiallahu anhum, unlimited examples. But when we look into the ayat, for example, the subject of the Quran, which is the two subjects together, but just as a reminder, because there are many, again, as we said, in just a few minutes every day, when we talked about the love of Allah, then there is always mentioned with that al-khawf wal-raja, the fear of Allah and the hope for the rewards from Allah. Because these three actions, and we talked about that many times before, these are pillars. These are the pillars of the ibadah in the heart. That means a person always have to have these three acts of worship in his heart whenever he's doing any ibadah. The perfect love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the fear of Allah, and the hope from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These three things together. And the fear and the hope, like the two wings of a bird. They fly with the two wings. Therefore, both have to be together, as the ulama they say. Sometimes you have more fear, sometimes you have more raja, hope for the rewards from Allah. The same thing happens to the heart when we're reciting the Quran. The Quran was not revealed as the chapter of al-khawf, Surah al-khawf, Surah al-raja, Surah al-muhammad. It's not like this. In the same page you go through all kinds of actions done by the heart, and this is by the one that created the hearts. So for someone to take, I'm going to take a month to study al-khawfu min Allah, right? And the whole month he just have the fear of Allah, and then he go to, doesn't work this way. When it comes to the Quran, leave yourself to the Quran. You will find yourself making all kinds of ibadat with one's heart, and then the physical actions becomes the easiest thing. And that's why when a person, for example, when they would look into what is the most fearful ayah in the Quran, akhwafu ayatin fil Quran, can be to some is the ayat of Jahannam and the punishment. And it's something when the heart is working to recite these verses, everlasting punishment in the hereafter, in the hellfire for the disbelievers, those who die in the state of disbelief. Knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His names and attributes, that He's Al-Aziz subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, Al-Jabbar. No one can overpower Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when people have received the message over and over again, and they still do evil, and spread evil and corruption and bloodshed, and they deserve by the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all by, He's the judge subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's the one that would punish them, not human beings. And then you see the mercy of Allah and the chances that are given. Even the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was sent as a mercy to mankind. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So in the most fearful ayah, like the ayat like this, and as many of us Salaf al-Salih, they said, it's from the last verses in Surah Al-Kahf that we recite every Jumu'ah. قُلْ هَلْ نُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِالْأَخْسَرِينَ أَعْمَالًا. Should we inform you of the most of the people, the most losers when it comes to their a'mal? Al-akhsari, not al-khasirin, al-akhsarin. The worst of the losers, those who would lose the most with regards to their actions. They have actions that looks like it's good. قل أننبئكم بالأخسرين أعمالا الذين ضل سعيهم في الحياة الدنيا وهم يحسبون أنهم يحسنون صنعا. Those who their sa'i, and the sa'i is the hard work. Like you make sa'i between the Safa and Marwa, you're not just walking for one step and stopping. Sa'i. فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, diligently in one's actions. So their life was like this. But ضل سعيهم في الحياة الدنيا. Their sa'i has been deviated, taken away from the right path. وَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسِنُونَ صُنْعًا while they think that they're doing good. They think that they have even goodness waiting for them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the worst, the most fearful, the worst state that a person can be in, and the most fearful thing. How would a person know then that his sa'i is not in dalal and not in deviation? Nothing but the wahy. Only the wahy. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He addressed the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, go to the wahy. Even go to the wahy that was revealed to Musa and Isa alayhi salam, and be sincere in even looking at it first. That will guide you to the book of Allah, to the Quran. But the wahy, not what has been invented, not the industry that created for you religion and manipulated for you. And the same thing for this ummah. Those who manipulated things, those who invented things. Go to the wahy, to the revelation from Allah, with ilm, of course, with understanding, so that the person would make sure that he is ala bayyinatin min Rabbi. He has clear evidences from his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This is how the deen is. And on the other side, and many verses that brings the fear of Allah, the day of judgment by itself. And then you have the ayat that has the raja, the hope for the mercy of Allah. قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ جَمِيعًا إِنَّهُ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ya ibadi, O my ibad, not the Ya ibadi alladhina ahsanu, not O ibadi, those who are good doers and believers and mashallah doing good deeds. No. Ya ibadi alladhina asrafu ala anfusihim. O my ibad, and Ya ibadi, just the call and attributing them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such a beautiful thing. And they're still ibad of Allah. Those who asrafu, al-israf is the excessiveness. They did so much excessiveness of sins against their own selves. Asrafu ala anfusihim. Not one sin here or there. No, so much excessiveness in sin. Disobedience to Allah, kufr, disbelief, bloodshed, evil, the worst evil actions. They filled the earth with the most corrupted actions. The heart is the most corrupted hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still calling them. الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ. What to do? لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Do not be in disparity from the mercy of Allah. Al-qunut min rahmatillah. To think or to have in one's heart that this person or myself, or talking about oneself or others, that said they're doomed forever, they're not going to receive the mercy of Allah. This is a major sin. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives all sins. إنه الغفور الرحيم. So this is a call for the tawbah, not a call for someone to continue, keep going, because there's other ayat that talks about the characteristics of the people of the hellfire. So this balance is there. And that's why the person to have the shyness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that brings the fear of Allah, that brings the love of Allah and the hope for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that the person is obedient to Allah. And having the shyness from Allah and having the best conduct and to be among the muhsineen in dealing with his own self, with his ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and between him and the other human beings, as we heard the different ayat of the Quran. All of that has to be established in the heart. So, ala qalbik, onto your heart. So the receivers in the human beings, it has to be the heart. And even if a disbeliever, when we're giving da'wah to someone, you want his heart. You want him to listen, so that whatever is being heard to go to the heart. Right? Listen with your heart. Listen with the sincerity, the truthfulness that you want to be devoted to Allah. Don't worry about, am I going to be able to do it? It's difficult for me, but my family, my wealth, my circumstances. This is not your subject now. Your subject is get to know what is right, and the person purify his heart. He seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he go through that test. And most of the test is the test of the heart. We talked about the ayah of the test. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِ يُحْبِبُكُمُ اللَّهِ. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, if you love Allah, follow me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love you. And there are many ayat that are tests to the heart. وَلَوْ أَنَّا كَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَنْ يَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ أَوْ يَخْرُجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِكُمْ مَا فَعَلُوا إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ مِّنْهُمْ وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ فَعَلُوا مَا يُوعَظُونَ بِهِ لَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُمْ وَأَشَدَّ تَثْبِيتًا. The ayat. If we ordained upon them to kill themselves or to give up all of their wealth, only few would do this. Test to the heart, because this is not in the deen. But if they would do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them and admonished them to do, it would have been best for them. Test. Do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered you to do, and seek the rewards from Allah and have the fear of Allah with the love of Allah, you will have the means easy for you, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His promise is the promise of the truth. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Whoever is obedient to Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make ways out for him, and He would provide for him from where he does not expect. And the Salaf al-Salih, as some said, that the best state that they have in their day is when, even though it's mentioned as an example, he says, when there's no even salt in the house. Why is that? Because now the heart will be fully relying upon Allah. What is meant by this is, when we have choices, it's a test from Allah. But we think that the difficulties or the crises or whatever we are in, and we don't have a choice, it's the most difficult. No, to them it's the easiest. Why? Because when you don't have a choice and you have nothing but to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, that knows for sure that this is the ease is coming. So that means when we have choices, right? When we have choices, make yourself as if you don't have choices. Before you think of the choices, when we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as if you're drowning, as if there's no choices, because no one knows what's going to happen. So when a person is devoted to that extent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with his turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, then the means of ease will come. But it's all depend on how our hearts are upon. It's not that we did this or I did this or my thinking of this or this. It's the hearts. And that's why the hearts changes the world. If the hearts are purified, all of that is by the words of Allah, the Quran. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts with the book of Allah and to follow the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa ala Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.